So this tractor belongs to a good friend of mine. It's a John Deere 4300, and he's been having troubles with it getting hard to start, harder and harder and harder to start. So the first thing you always want to pay attention to is if you give it full throttle and you're cranking on it, do you see any smoke coming out the exhaust pipe, like it's getting fuel or it's not getting any fuel? Well, this particular tractor, by cranking it, there was no smoke coming out of the pipe whatsoever. So he had been working on it and this and that, and he finally brought it up here, and I told him, I said, is it progressively getting worse? And he said, oh yeah, it's progressively getting worse. I said, well, how do you start it now? He said, I take a can of starting fluid and I hit it with starting fluid, and once it gets to running on the ether where the RPMs pick up, then it takes off and runs. So I've run into this several times, and what I've always found was the fact that the pumping plungers in the injection pump are worn so bad that at low RPM they won't pump enough fuel to open the high pressure nozzles. So we know we're going to have to take it apart. The second thing we learned is that he's been running fuel out of the gas stations that's biofuel, and he doesn't use the tractor a lot. If you don't use the tractor a lot, go get you some good red fuel that's non-biodiesel, because I tell you what, that stuff sits around and it goes bad, and it's destructive. And when we start pulling this pump apart, I'm sure that I'll show you what we find in there. But always be mindful of biofuel and good fuel. If you're not going to run the fuel through the machine in a short period of time, make sure you get some good 100% diesel, especially in a tractor. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to take the fuel injection lines, we're going to take them off. We're going to pull off the inlet and the outlet fuel line. We're going to take the fuel lines off of the transfer pump. We're going to pull the 4 bolts out of this little cover and pull this little cover off. We're going to take these 2 retaining screws and take those off, get all that out of our way so we can get in there to this pump. A lot of times these 4 Phillips screws, you need an impact driver to get them out like you'd use on a motorcycle, because they are tight and you don't want to strip the screw out. So you got to be very careful there. Use an impact driver if you have to get these out. There's a big rubber seal that goes around the inside of this. All that'll get discarded as we go. We'll put all that in there brand new. So the first thing when you get an engine that's not getting any fuel is there's a camshaft. There's 3 lobes on the camshaft, one here, here, and here. So as these cams go up and down, it pushes these pumping plungers up and down. That's what pumps your fuel. If you get an engine that's not getting fuel, a lot of times with this biofuel or something's been sitting around for a long time, these pumping plungers will get stuck in the up position where they can't cycle, and you're not going to get any fuel. If you get one of these or 2 of these or whatever stuck, you're not going to get any fuel. This particular injection pump, this engine was hard to start. It was not getting any fuel when you crank it, and the only way to get it to start was to hit it with starting fluid. Once the RPMs came up and these things started reciprocating a lot faster, they pumped enough fuel to make it run, but it didn't have any power. But if you look right here, you'll see there's a rack, and all of these are tied onto a rack. So when you take them off, what I do, I made a tool for it. When you take these things off, you have to keep upward spring tension on here to keep this gear in contact with the rack. If it comes and moves, then your fuel timing is going to be off. So you got to make sure that this gear stays in the upward position with that spring. This machine had biofuel in it, and man, what a mess. So if you can see this, let me get the light up here a little better. Look at the end of that fitting right there. That's what biofuel can do for you. It just looks like it's a big pile of rust in there. And the same way here, you see where number 3 pumping plunger, I have number 3 pumping plunger out of it right now. And I'm going to show you this pumping plunger. Show it to you a little better. Here's the number 3 pumping plunger out of this injection pump. That's your pumping plunger, this is your barrel. These are a very close tolerance fit, and usually if you was to take one piece and hold it in your hand long enough, it won't go back together again. That's how close of a tolerance fit that they are. So when you look at the end of it here and you see the slot straight up and down in alignment with that hole, that is the off position. So as it rotates around, it gives you more fuel and less fuel until you hit the off position. This little flat tab right here is what goes in that gear that's connected to that rack that actually turns the pumping plunger, and it turns them all at the same time. They're all connected together. Turns them all at the same time. Down inside of the injection pump housing there's a pin, and that pin lines up with this little groove in the barrel. So when it goes in, it has to go in with the groove in the barrel. The pumping plunger has to go in time so that this flat spot of the pumping plunger lines up with the gear on the bottom. I'll be honest with you, it's a difficult task to get this all right. The only thing that you can do is you can look up at the top and you can see the notch, the off notch, and you can see where the barrel lines up with the pin, so that when you put it down inside that injection pump housing, that you know that you're not 180 out of time. The other thing is there's an identification mark right there. See, it says M-5. You can take the numbers off the pump and then you look up this number here and it'll tell you which pumping plungers that you need to buy. So I got these from Diesel Parts. It's all overseas stuff. They come pre-packaged. This particular engine is a 3-cylinder. I bought 4 pumping plungers because that's the way it comes. It's cheaper to buy 4 than it was to buy 3. The delivery valve up on top of this barrel assembly, this is your delivery valve, and they are a machine fit. This machine fit and this machine fit. Machine fit. They're lapped together. Inside of that, you have, this is your delivery valve right here. It goes down in there and fits down inside of that bore. On top of that is a spring. On top of that's a little valve. Inside the barrel head here is a copper gasket. It fits down right here and seals. And then there's an O-ring that I have to change out, all the O-rings. Here's an O-ring that goes in this groove right here. So as it's assembled and it's set in there, and then it's torqued, and then after you get them all in and done, there's a set of clamps, I'll show them to you, that go in here and clamp these so they can't back off. But all 3 of them in alignment once you get them all torqued. But what we're going to do is we're going to change out these pumping plungers. These pumping plungers are shot. Usually you can take and hold your finger over the top of them really tight and grab a hold of this plunger and rotate it, and you should feel it pulling a vacuum on your finger to the point where it's really a good hard vacuum. This plunger has no vacuum whatsoever. I don't even know how it runs. And when you pull the plunger out and you look at it, you can see all the discoloration in the barrel and in the plunger. So I would say biofuel is the culprit here. But anyhow, we're going to put a set of these in there. We got to clean all this biofuel out of here. One other thing, I've had these soaking in Chem Dip now for a week, and I took them out and cleaned them all up, and I put Kroll oil on them so that they can soak a little bit more. But to clean this stuff up is a total nightmare, and it's all because of biofuel. When you've got biofuel, you need to be running an additive in it, number one, for lubrication, and for number two, if it's going to sit any period of time, you really need to get it out of there and put in some Premier diesel. When you look inside the pump, look how discolored it is and how difficult that's going to be to clean all that out. Well, the problem being is that, number one, it's in this transfer pump right here. This transfer pump right here is going to look exactly the same as what that looks like. All these fuel lines, the inside of that fuel tank, that fuel filter right there, you can tell just by looking at it what it looks like. So I'm going to show you this retainer. This is the retainer, and you see the little slot in the bottom of it right here. This retainer goes underneath of this spring. So there you can see the retainer. Here you can see the retainer. So to change the pumping plunger and barrel, you have to raise up on that spring without this top gear coming loose, and you have to index this so that you can slide this out. You see the notch in it where you slide this thing out to turn that pumping plunger loose so you can take the pumping plunger out of the top. It is not easy. It's difficult. It takes a lot of patience. Plus, you have to keep this spring tension up to keep the gear in time. So what I did first was I took the delivery valve assembly out and raise up on your spring and slide this keeper out. A little bit tricky. So the tool that I built to do that with is this one right here. So this goes up over the top of the head assembly. This goes down up against the spring, raises the spring up, and then I sneak in there with a magnet and slide that keeper in. At the same time, I've got a little block of wood where my hand is right here holding it together. But it can be done. It's just difficult. But first we got to get this housing all cleaned up. And once we get the housing cleaned up, we probably need to take the transfer pump off and get it all cleaned out. It just turns into a nightmare trying to get all this stuff clean. The next part of it is the nozzle. So you get 3 nozzles here, and you know, really, to deal with them, you're better off if you just take them out and exchange them with some new ones, because to try to take them all apart, clean them all up, reset the popping pressure on them, it's just a total nightmare. So we're going to put this one back in, number 3, and then we're going to take and we'll change out number 2, and we'll change out number 1. We'll get the housing all cleaned up. So we put number 3 back in there, and now we're getting ready to pull out number 2. And the first thing we did was we took the delivery valve assembly out of the top and took it all out of there, and now we're going to pull the barrel out. So there's your barrel assembly, and this notch right here is the notch that lines up with the pin that's facing you in the inside that bore. So pull the barrel out first. The other thing I wanted to show you was this Quicksilver power tune right here. That is some good stuff. That is one of the only things that I've ever found that cuts that biofuel rust. It'll dissolve that rust and clean up those fittings. You can look right down inside of this pump on the inside here how clean it's getting. I still got to clean where I pulled them barrels out, but that it will dissolve it and it will eat it up. It foams up really crazy. See how it washes that stuff right out of there. But man, oh man, talk about something that'll eat it up. That and that Chem Dip is the only thing that I've ever found that works on this stuff to eat that biofuel out of there. I mean, that stuff is just ornery. But anyhow, so we pulled the barrel out, and now we're going to get in there and we're going to pull the pumping plunger out, and we'll get ready to put it back in there new. So we collapsed the spring and we reached in there with a magnet and we slid the keeper out, you know. And now we're going to reach down inside and we're going to pull the pumping plunger out with our magnet. There's our pumping plunger. And to show you how it fits on that keeper, you see how it fits on the keeper right there. So you have to take and slide the keeper out of the way, and that way you can get the pumping plunger out of there. You look at the top of that barrel though, how discolored it is and worn and all that rust and from that biofuel. So now we'll go back and we'll clean up this whole barrel assembly, and we'll put a new one in there too. Now if you look, you're going to see this one here, number one, is on high cam. You see how the lifter is up? So both of these were down. So what we are going to have to do when we get number 2 changed is we're going to have to rotate the engine until this lifter is all the way at the bottom. When it gets all the way down to the bottom, then we can take it apart. But you have to have it bottomed out to get it out of there. So there we've put number 2 in. And if you look down there, you'll see that the notch for the shutoff position is in alignment where it ought to be. And now we're going to put the delivery valve in that on. We're going to put a new O-ring on. Right here. I'm going to take a little bit of lube. Put on that O-ring. Keep that O-ring lubricated. Here's our delivery valve. And that is a machine surface. So you want to make sure there's nothing on that machine surface. You want to make sure it is spotless before you set it down in the hole. And then the delivery valve spring goes in the hole. Now this little copper washer, you can set it down in the You can set it down in the head like that with just a little touch of grease. Make sure it stays there. And our line valve is already in there. I'm going to center it up. Screw it down. Get it past that O-ring and be ready to torque. One thing you always want to remember is that the screwdriver slot that you see on these three collars, that's the adjustment when you calibrate the pump. So do not take those screws loose. Them pumping plungers will come out without it. Do not take those screws loose. So now for the last one, you see that the pumping plunger is up. Get a little better light there. There you go. You can see that that pumping plunger is up. So we got to bar this engine. So if you look, you'll see now this one is bottomed out and ready to change. And now this one is on high cam, so it's actually would be in the pumping stage right here. But this is the last one we got to change, and it's bottomed out. So delivery valve's out. We're going to reach in here with our magnet, shake it around, and pull out the barrel assembly. Look how nasty that thing is. It's that biofuel. Get it out of there. Then we got to get our fancy tool and get in here and collapse this spring and pull that keeper off the bottom of there so we can reach in there with a magnet and pull the pumping plunger out. So now that I've taken in this one, I had to turn a little bit. See them two little flat spots on there? You can reach in there with a screwdriver and turn them to the point where the open spot is out, so you can reach in there with your magnet. Once the spring's collapsed, slide that out. Once you get that slid out, you know, put it in your parts tray there, and then you can reach down from the top and use a magnet and pull out your pumping plunger. There's your pumping plunger. If you look at it real close, you'll see right here on the side of it, it says M-5. That's the size of it. Of course, this Yanmar injection pump number is pretty important when you start buying parts for the thing. So now we'll go back in reverse order. We're going to clean up the bore with our Quicksilver. And I guarantee you that bore is filthy. You look down in there and you'll just see it's just absolutely filthy, but boy, that stuff really does a good job of cleaning. About the only thing I ever found that worked really good. Look at that, just blow that stuff right out of there. Good stuff. Let that all run through and clean that out, and then we'll get us another new pumping plunger over here. I've drained all the biofuel out of it. There's no biofuel in it no more. We're going to put Premier Red Diesel back in it, and we'll put some Howes lubricant in it. I love Howes lubricant. Good stuff. I run it in my truck. I run it in the wintertime. I run it in the summertime. I've never had any trouble with Howes. Howes is a good product. I need to get a new fuel filter for it. I'm going to take it off and get a new fuel filter for it. I'm going to have to go find one of them yet. So after we got all the biofuel out of it, you know, we went back and we cleaned this sediment bowl here with the Quicksilver. Works well. We get a new filter, but what I was wanting to tell you was most important is that a lot of people will take this filter and put it in this housing and then set the housing up on the filter head and screw the base nut on to hold it in place. And you can always tell when they do that because it doesn't get seated at the top and it wrinkles the filter. So then what happens is that filter is not filtering. In the top of this filter is a little bitty hole with an O-ring, and you always want to take that filter and stick it up into that, and you turn it back and forth, and it'll pop onto that little stem that sticks out in here before you put the glass jar with the spring and the lid and everything on it, because that way it's up touching, it'll stay right there, and you know you're going to be filtering your fuel 100%. Do not put that filter in that glass jar and just set that glass jar up on there and tighten it up, because that is not going to work, and it's going to give you trouble. And a lot of that, when that fuel is not filtered, a lot of that, it's going to go right to them injection pump plungers, and it's going to tear them up. That's not what you want. So make sure you get that filter up on that stem before you put the spring, the glass jar, and the nut on. So we bled the fuel system. We got our little air bleeder here. We opened it up. We got fuel all the way up to our air bleeder. We cracked all the fuel injection lines at the nozzles. We got fuel up there. We've ran it a couple of times to help get the air out. It's a little bit hard to start until you get all the air out of it. We've got all the air out of it now, and I'm going to let you listen to it and see how nice and smooth it is. Doesn't get much better than that. Well, I'll say this much about it. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it can be done. So if you're ambitious and you want to try it, I'd say go for it. So hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.